Are you struggling to create an intentional headspace? Are you unable to connect deeper with yourself? Come, and together, let's address the elephant in the room. I'm your host, Sinead Roche, and this is the Uncomfortable Podcast. So you know how everyone experiences conflicts with people, and everyone experiences like fights. And fights, I don't mean like yelling or anything like that. Like you just have like arguments and like they lead to kind of like bad fallouts in that sense. So for me, this one's embarrassing. Let me tell you something. Like I tell you guys this, I don't even like to think about it because like you know when you cringe internally, that's what I feel. So there was this one time, a significant other of mine and I got into a conflict. Let's call it like that. Kind of like a little falling out for like a good 3 days or whatever. And it was bad, and I took it really badly. Like I took it really badly, and I became really self-destructive in the way that I handled it. And the way this looked like in this specific example, like during this experience, is I went to my room and everything like that, and I was just crying most of the time. And when his friends came, I started telling them everything, like oh, how hurt I was, like not everything, but you get what I'm saying. Like I just told them like what I was feeling, and looking back at it now, it kind of feels like I was gossiping, and I try not to do that nowadays, but that's what it was. And because I couldn't cope with these feelings, I got wasted. Not some of my best decisions, definitely not. And I got wasted on the day that it happened. I got wasted on the day after. And I think the last day during this, it was like a Sunday. So I said, let me take a break. But yeah, I was not in a good place. I was really self-destructive. And when my significant other and I, we like kind of talked everything out, I felt really embarrassed and childish with the way I acted. Like my feelings were completely like valid, right? I'm not gonna say like they were invalid. Like the hurt and being angry too was there. But the way I reacted with it, it was really self-destructive. And that was like one of the biggest incidences that I've seen like in recent time right now, where I realized I didn't have any boundaries for myself or expectations for myself. And the thing is, I'm a very emotionally driven person, and I know that like passion leads me, anger leads me, motivation leads me. And when it comes to being in these situations, like, and I'm letting all my negative emotions lead me, I'm letting them control me, it leads to very, very regretful experiences and moments which I wish I could take back, but I can't. And so I try not to look at them as much as like a regret, but just as like a lesson that in the future I can do better. And kind of like with the realization that I didn't have many expectations for myself and boundaries, I realized that I had to reevaluate kind of like the way I felt I had discipline. Like I thought I was a really disciplined person in the sense of I got my work done. I was always looking forward to doing these things and like actually pushing forward to doing these things. I went to the gym almost every day, except for when I got like injured and things like that, but that's kind of irrelevant. But it made me realize that I wasn't like mentally disciplined and emotionally disciplined. Like it made me realize that I like to act on my impulsive thoughts. I like to act on the emotions that made me reactive, right? Which is what led me to like really self-destructive behaviors. Like after like an argument or something like this, why are you getting wasted? Like I really had to ask myself, like, Sinead, like too many days like in a row you were thinking like that's okay to have that type of reaction. It's okay to go and tell everyone your business. Like it kind of made me feel like, oh my gosh, man, like I kind of had like cognitive dissonance, like where what I felt mentally, like my behavior and my thoughts, they weren't adding up. So I kind of had to really evaluate what that looks like for me, like what my discipline looks like for me. And I saw like my main problem, the reason why I didn't feel like I had that many boundaries in place or many expectations of myself is because I always let my emotions dictate my actions. And that's extremely bad. That's extremely bad, especially because there are going to be so many moments in my life where I'm going to be faced with so many different problems. And if I'm letting my emotions constantly guide me and I'm not sticking to my core values, then my core values are being thrown out the window based off of the fact that I'm just emotional in this state. And so let's talk about boundaries and expectations today. Before we get into what that even is and what that means, let me talk to you guys about why it's important to have those. I was reading somewhere that the power of your word is correlated to your personal power. That stuck with me, the idea of having personal power. Because I think a lot of times, like, when you're reading things and when you're going about your day, like, I think not everyone, but I think for the most part, people like to have power and that sense of control in their life. The thing is, you can't control many things in your life. I can't control my environment. I can't control the way people act towards me. I can't control what people's thoughts are about me. I can only control myself. I can only control how I react towards things and how I think about things. And having that power over myself is really important, especially for the type of person that I want to become and the person that I hope I stand for. Furthermore, some things that, like, when you have boundaries, when you have expectations, it also helps to retain your autonomy, protect your mental health, and also foster healthier relationships, because you also have like a healthier relationship with yourself. Because, as I was saying, like, it allows you to stick to your core values. It allows you to have non-negotiables for yourself. And so you are becoming like kind of like a disciplined version of who you are. And so when you're going out to meet other people, you can't control what they're doing, but you can control how you react to things, and you can control how you move in that environment. And having that awareness of yourself, like, it requires a lot of self-reflection, obviously. But I think when you take the time to consciously and not passively, like really consciously make the time and make the effort to look at, okay, let's look at some of the past scenarios in which I could have done better. And you figure out, these really don't, like, the way I acted really doesn't align with like some of my core values. And you kind of like readjust that. I think you feel proud of yourself. And in recent time, I felt more proud of myself than I have like in the past when it comes to like the way I handle certain situations. And I'm really happy about that. Like, but getting to that point is uncomfortable and it's unsatisfying. Like, it's unsatisfying. So, and especially when it comes to boundaries specifically. So let me explain what a boundary is. It's a psychological demarcation that protects the integrity of an individual or group, and that can help someone set realistic limits on their participation in a relationship or in an activity. And in comparison to that, an expectation is like a strong belief that something will happen or be the case. And what I really think people need to like understand is like expectations determine our reality. Now going back to the point of saying why I think boundaries are like all of this, like, yeah, change and growth and everything, it's uncomfortable, right? But I think boundaries specifically, I have a problem with boundaries. I have a problem with boundaries, especially internal boundaries that you have to keep with yourself, because they're so unsatisfactory. Like, for me, the biggest emotion that I'm very comfortable with, and I don't think I should be proud of the fact that I'm really comfortable with it, but I'm very close with anger. Like, anger and me are like this. And there's been situations in the past where I'm like, because I've like, okay, I've reevaluated my life, not like my life like that, but I've reevaluated the way I've acted in the past, and now I want to act differently. There's been times where I don't get to be petty. I don't get to be angry. Like, I don't say like snippy things to people. I calm myself down, and I don't get to be like the way I was in the past. And every single time I've had one of those experiences where I'm no longer acting on my impulse of anger or my impulse of thoughts, and I'm actually being calm and like, you know, not trying to take things personal, the feeling afterwards is so unsatisfactory, because I'm like, always in my head, I'm afterwards like, you know, I could have said this, I could have said that, like she should be happy, or like they should be happy that I didn't do that to them. I'm like, calm down, because the feeling after, like when after I've like thought all these thoughts, I've always said to myself, I'm like, at least I didn't do that though. Like, and because I didn't say things like that, the conflict didn't get worse. Because I didn't act with my emotions, we're actually working towards finding a solution together, and that makes me feel so much pride, like, because I am a person who's prone to temper tantrums. Like, there was actually this one time that my brother, he moved my desk, and this was like when I was 14. I was a freshman in high school, or freshman or sophomore in high school, 15, around that age. My brother moved my desk literally from one part of the room to the other part of the room, because the light, I always used to work at night, and the light used to bother my parents. And I had a full-on temper tantrum. And I was like, oh my gosh. Like, looking back at that, that's so embarrassing. Like, and I try not to be embarrassed about it, because it's just the kind of the way, like, you progress. Like, yeah, you're gonna have really bad moments that you have to look back on. But had I been the person I am now looking at that situation, I definitely would have handled it better. And like, I think one of the great things about like when you have like boundaries with yourselves is you get to go back and you get to reflect on those experiences, and yeah, you get to re-see like how everything played out, but you also get to reimagine how things could have potentially played out had you gone in with the mindset that you have now. And it doesn't mean you get to go back and change how history like played itself out, but it kind of gives you kind of like a better sense of control and grasp of how you're thinking now in comparison to how you were thinking then. And so now I kind of want to go into some of my boundaries and expectations, and these did not come about after this, like the conflict that I was talking to you guys about in the beginning with like my significant other, and the way that I was like gossiping afterwards, and like the drinking, like they didn't come about immediately after that. I actually took, I think, like 3 more different conflicts that I was like, oh my gosh, this is not going well. This is not it. And so for one of my boundaries now is that if I'm emotional, I do not drink. I do not take any sort of substance, like, because it is unfair to myself to put myself in a worse situation than I'm already to begin with, that I'm already in to begin with. And it's also unfair on the people who are around me, who then have to you're kind of expecting them to take care of you. And so now, if I feel anxiety, I do not drink. And I do not care. If I'm in a conflict with a person, I do not drink. Because that, like, I relinquish my control over then to a substance, and for me, it's really important that I have that control within myself. So I just don't drink. And yeah, sometimes it's not fun. Like, I've had to say no to things, and I've had to say no to so many things, to going out to things, because I know if I were to go out and if I were to take something, that like, it's gonna end up 1,000 times worse, and then I'm gonna have to look on that experience with regret. And I don't wanna do that. Then another thing that, another one of my boundaries that I try to implement, this one's a bit more difficult just because I feel like I am an oversharer, is if I have a conflict with someone, I journal. I journal now. Like I just recently started a document, and it's like about a month ago or whatever, and it's up to 20 pages right now. So anytime I'm feeling any type of emotion, I journal it out. Any conflict I have, I journal it out and I write about it. And I try to not talk to so many people about my conflicts now. I think I talk to maybe 1 or 2 people. And then I also talk to my therapist, and that helps. Like, that helps because I feel like it's then, for me, it's no longer gossiping, and because it's not even like I'm talking about what another person did to me or anything like that. I'm just talking about how I feel and how I can get over things and kind of get through things. And for me, journaling really works because I get to reread everything, and I get to go back and I get to look at how my thoughts have progressed and how I've grown from certain moments, like starting at the bottom to all the way here now. So that makes me really happy too, like having that boundary within myself. Another thing that I have is I take a step back from situations now in order to react calmly. Like, I will leave you, and I will not give you an explanation in order for me not to become reactive. Like, I had this situation with a friend recently, like, and it was very, man, it was bad. It was bad. I don't want to go into too much like what the situation was, because it's not just like my own thing, but what ended up happening is, like, I ignored him for like a good 2 weeks, and it was bad because we also have classes together, and like he kind of started to notice that. And then I texted him after like my emotions had calmed down, and I was like, hey, listen, can we talk about this? Like, I'm gonna talk to you, and I'll apologize to you, genuinely apologize to you, because if I do it right now, I won't be able to say sorry. And I was also really fortunate because, like, when we talked, like, he's a very understanding person, so that also made like it easier. But and even though I know I hurt that person in the sense of like the ignoring and taking a step back, it was also really good because I know the past me would have come out had I not taken that step back. And if, like, in the past when I've had conflicts, especially with friends, and I don't take moments to myself, I become a really emotionally manipulative. I do. And so I was glad I was able to do that, because I was able to react to that situation in a really calm manner. And so yeah, that's another boundary that I have, an expectation that I have for myself. Then some other, like, these are personal ones, and like these aren't necessarily for the situation that had happened, but when I feel negative self-talk coming on, I stop the trail of thoughts immediately. I try to become really active within my thoughts, and that's an expectation I have for myself, because I know if I let that negative self-talk continue, even as satisfying as it is, because, like, you know, like when you've gotten so used to a pattern, so it becomes really satisfactory for you to like just continue it out, I stop it. And I start telling myself lies about myself. I start telling myself how great I am, you know, because I don't want to continue with that thought process. I do not allow myself to induce a panic attack or like an anxiety attack. So, you know, like when you have like a lot of lists of things to do, and you just keep on looking at the list, and then you start to like hyperventilate. I don't do that anymore, because I know it's worse for my health, and I know it stresses me out even more. I have an expectation of myself that I actually learned from someone, that I do not yell at people anymore. At least I try not to. I do snap sometimes, but I try not to yell at people in situations, because I value respecting others, and I want to show that also within my actions. And then the last boundary that I will leave you guys with of mine is that whenever I feel uncomfortable, I leave the room immediately, and I will only enter that room again when I feel safe to. It does not look normal to other people. Like, there's been times where like we've gone clubbing, and I leave the room. I leave the club, and I go outside, and I don't come back until I feel the need to come back, or there's been times I actually haven't even come back, and it just like, it's better for me. And I don't feel the need also to like explain myself to others when it comes to situations like that, because I know it's in my best interest, and I also know it's in their best interest for me not to be in that space when I'm not feeling that safe. So those are some of my boundaries and expectations. And while, you know, like when you're sober, and when I say sober, I mean like when you're in a really calm state of mind, it's very easy to enact all of these. It's very easy to stick to them. They get tested though, like the discipline that you have with your boundaries and expectations, they get tested when you're put into triggering moments. And that's when it comes to the fact that like the boundaries you set for yourself, they can't be so strict. Like, you have to allow them to be a bit adaptive. Like, and you also have to be able to give yourself grace and empathy. Like, immediately once you make a list of things like, oh yeah, this is what I stand for, these are my core values, let me write them out in the expectations that I have for myself, that doesn't mean that you're going to enact all of them and emulate all of them like immediately. Like, you can give yourself time to adjust to those, which means you're going to make some mistakes. And even after you've had these expectations of yourself for years, there are going to be times where like something just triggers you and you snap, so you can't keep it intact. And that's where you actually have to empathize with yourself, right? These guidelines can't be so strict that like anytime you mess up, you feel like it's taking from you, and that like you feel so much negativity on yourself, like you put that negativity on yourself. No, it just means that going forward, you're like, oh, okay, let me reflect on the situation, maybe what triggered me, okay? In the next time that something triggers me, how can I still keep my boundaries and my expectations of myself intact? Like asking yourself these questions, so that you can move forward, but you don't necessarily need to go down on yourself and be like, man, you suck, like you weren't able to stick to these things. And I think that when you build that kind of like self-reflective and self-aware mindset, you become really powerful. Like, again, the thing about like how your words, like when you actually show up with the actions as well, like you have that personal power. And I don't think people really understand how important that is until they don't have it. How important it is until they see that like, oh my gosh, like I haven't had it this entire time. And so when you're able to build that up, and even after you've had some mistakes, you continue to grow and you continue to self-reflect, I think you develop an entire different sense of self-pride for yourself that people who don't see themselves with like expectations and boundaries, like they don't understand that yet entirely. Because in order to get to that point where you're actually sticking by your guidelines and you have the discipline to stick to them, like you have to be uncomfortable by doing things that are not natural to you, which means you're not going with the impulsive action of everything. You actually are sitting there and you're thinking and you're being active in every single action you take. You're not being passive in your life, you're being very conscious in your life. And that takes a lot of mental capacity and also a lot of mental work and self-reflection. And it also leaves room for self-doubt, but we'll talk about that in the future, which people don't like to do, right? So that's what I have for you guys today on expectations and boundaries for yourself. Now the question I'm going to leave you guys with is, if you were to look back at certain moments that don't reflect the person that you want to be, so if you were to go back into certain situations and you've seen how you've acted and it doesn't resemble the person who you want to be and doesn't resemble your core values, right? What do you feel like in those moments you'd have to sacrifice in order to become that person? So in a sense, I'm asking you, what patterns that feel good to you and are impulsive to you do you feel that you have to break? I want you to ask yourselves that question throughout this week. Go back and maybe reflect on some of the ways that you haven't implemented your core values. And then start, make a list for yourself and start seeing how you can involve that and incorporate that into your life. But yeah, ask yourself, what patterns that feel good that you have, do you have to break? Yeah, and that's it for today. Thank you guys so much for listening. I hope you guys subscribe to the Instagram and you continue to listen to my podcast. Wow. I think that was good. That one was good. Unless you think it was bad. I was at the